Well, unfortunately, my idea of upgrading from Vista to 7 and 7 to 10 did not work out. The COA didn't work strictly for Vista. I wanted to see if the Dell OEM disk had some kind of specific license, and it did. I'm going to use a old Windows 7 Pro product key. There we are. I'm going to do a fresh install over this. So much faster copying from a flash drive. So much faster. So now this is just installing Windows 10, and that's not all too exciting. So check back when this is done. Oh, it looks so gross. I don't like Windows 10. Oh, why? Oh, man. Let's see if Windows activated. I gotta hand it to them. There's one thing I really like about the newer versions of Windows 10. They include a temperature sensor for the GPU. Yes. This is really annoying. I love how they make their option the blue box, like it's okay or confirm or enter, and the option you choose is the secondary. It's for that reason that I just don't. I don't want to use Edge. I don't want to use it. Start button's still broken. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. And that. That looks clean. Let's see. Hey, OpenShell fixed the start menu. Thanks, OpenShell. It's so much better. Like, some people get offended by like what people talk about on Twitter or politics or something. But this is offensive. You don't mess with Notepad like that. What did Notepad do to you? Isn't this basically like a mesh network? I'm good on that. Alright, rattling is driving me nuts, so without further ado, I think it's time to put the door back on this computer here. So now I have the computer fully assembled and just about everything's good in terms of hardware. We spent a lot of part 2 just installing Windows. First we installed Windows Vista, activated it over the phone, then tried to use an OEM specific upgrade path to Windows 7 to see if it would carry over the license, to see if we could then harvest that license for a Windows 10 Pro license. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. I had an old Windows 7 Pro product key laying around, so I decided to donate that to this computer here. And for anyone that doesn't know, if you have a Windows 7 or Windows 8 product key, you can use that to get the equivalent version of Windows 10. So if you have Windows 7 Home, Windows 8.1 Home, you can get Windows 10 Home out of that, and the same for Pro. The next thing we're going to be doing is resizing the Windows partition and installing probably Debian. I think Debian's probably the best bet. And I'm probably not gonna use GNOME, but rather like XFCE or even LXDE. I really like LXDE. It's really lightweight, and I think its minimum requirements are still, it's like a Pentium 2 and a very conservative amount of RAM, something like probably that Windows XP would run on, maybe in Windows 2000. So we'll get working on that. So even on Debian's wiki here, they talk about UEFI plus GPT. It's a great combo for modern systems. Be very careful, very careful, and make sure that you have a motherboard that fully supports both of these, UEFI and GPT. If you don't have UEFI, you're not going to be able to have GPT, or should I say a system disk that works with GPT. And with more recent builds of Windows 10, there's actually a tool you can use to convert an MBR system disk to GPT, and that's very convenient unless you don't actually have GPT support, like this computer down here. If I ran MBR to GPT, which you can run from the command line on Windows 10 on this computer, it would work. It would convert the disk to GPT, and then when I restart, I wouldn't be able to boot into the operating system. The only way then back out would be to go back into a Windows 10 recovery environment and then run command prompt and go into disk part, and from disk part then clean the partition and convert it back to MBR, and in doing that it would erase everything. So be very careful. One of the surefire ways to know that you have an activated license of Windows so you can change your background. So I have all these lovely options here, but sadly none of them are going to work. Now this is a background. I wonder if there's a trick. You can use like Windows subsystem for Linux to save to that location. That would be funny. This is gonna do for now. Yeah. Now that's the background Windows 11 should come with. Anyway, let's get to work on resizing this partition. I like disk management because it looks almost exactly the same from just Windows 2000, maybe even like NT4. I'll give Debian, I'll give it randomly 72,000 megabytes. It's roughly, I guess what an 80 gig hard drive would be. So now we have this unallocated partition here. And we got our Windows partition. With that, we should be good. To restart and get to work installing Debian 11. Try to get focus better. So I have Debian Buster 10.8 and it's an LXDE build. I could install Ubuntu. Ubuntu is based on Debian. The whole reason people go to Linux is more to have some freedom and control. I'd still say if you've never used Linux before, Ubuntu is still a pretty good bet to start with. Ubuntu is pretty easy to use, but with that, some people would argue it's been compromised, and it's been compromised for a long time. But they'll say the same thing about Debian. They'll say the same thing about probably Slackware too. Let's just use the graphical installer. Go easy. Linux has somewhat of a daunting reputation around itself. But it really has, it's never been easier to use. Case in point, you can plug in a whole bunch of different gamepads, and by and large, they'll probably work. Saying that about Linux, I mean, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but Linux has come a long way towards being something that people not so tech savvy can use on a day-to-day basis. And I guess where it's a little technical, it's usually a lot easier to fix than, say, if Windows breaks. So, if you notice, I just made a root password and I made an account password. It's really not all too different from on Windows. You can make an administrator account, you can set a password for that, and then you can make a more restricted account or have one with specific permissions or group policy settings applied to it. And in the case of this, I just made the root password and my account password the same. Some people would say that's kind of foolish, don't do that, but I'm not going to be really doing much of anything major with this other than getting it set up to play some games and comparing it with Windows and showing you that really is not all too daunting to use Linux. So, Debian automatically selected the partition that we just freed up in Windows Disk Management. So put it in there. Increasingly, it's getting to a point where, just like with Windows, where you really don't have to know the underlying infrastructure, you don't have to know every single component about the file system and the proper sizes for each partition and what each partition does in concert to run the operating system. It's increasingly become like that for Linux. Now, if you were to go and watch a full install of Gentoo, then you'd be going through the old-fashioned way. Increasingly, Linux's use case gets stronger and stronger over time, and arguably Windows has been getting a bit weaker. That said, Linux only has maybe 2% now of the desktop share. But I really do wonder, what's really gonna break the dam? Windows 11 is asking quite a bit more of everybody in terms of specs and in terms of, its expectations of users. You can't have local user accounts anymore. You have to have a Microsoft account. You need, beefier specs, a newer motherboard. And of course, all that, is still subject to change. I heard that you have to have a webcam. You have to have a webcam by 2023, around the same time they discontinue Windows 8 for good. And for it, you're getting this operating system that, it wasn't the appeal of Windows to run programs made for Windows and not apps made in Microsoft App Store. If I wanted to run apps, I'm not sure why. The Windows Store in itself seems like a cheap imitation. It seems like an imitation of a Linux package manager, only not nearly as robust and only GUI based. You might be able to use PowerShell, but everything about it is, on a technical level, much more basic than, something especially like Debian. Debian's package manager, it's the same one that's in Ubuntu and in many, many distros. Debian's kind of like the basis for a lot of them. And the amount of content and resources and software that you can get that works just fine in enterprise settings, and if anything runs far more stable. It's like, why would you pay more money for a more resource intensive, bloated, proprietary operating system that in every way seems inferior? And I'm convinced that the biggest kind of 2x4 propping up whatever's keeping the landslide from, inevitably coming are businesses that have licenses for, 30 computers, 50 computers that all use Office 365. And Office 365, by and large, kind of relies on Excel and spreadsheets and files that are, they've been made in Excel, and you need to use Excel. in order to keep using them. Let's do it. And, you know, isn't that the conundrum with mainframes? Mainframes are still a lucrative business, but it's by and large the people who are, you know, it's the people who've had mainframes for a long time that, you know, they're codependent on them and they need to maintain them. So install grub on the SSD that we installed Windows 10 onto. If open source Office software can already basically do everything that, you know, casual users need, and Office is increasingly only needed for people who have legacy files that are essential for their business to operate, then how is Microsoft's entire ecosystem any different from the one of like IBM's mainframe business? And I'm not trying to, I don't hate Microsoft. I don't really hate any of these companies. It's just, they've made a lot of pretty radical changes to their operating system and their software over the past, let's say, decade. And, you know, the tragedy of it is that some of it was great. You know, some of the improvements they made to the Windows kernel and Windows 8.1, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10 have been incredible. And yet, they've just made it harder and harder for really power users and for casuals and for business users. And, you know, I wonder if we're getting to a point where for newcomers, Linux will be easier and faster and more stable and in every way the go-to option. If it becomes the default and Windows becomes the legacy. There's a very strong chance of that, I think. But for now, let's see if we did this without destroying the bootloader. Okay. Let's try to boot into Windows. Windows can get really, really cranky about booting from anything, even from a second hard drive more recently. And it looks like Windows is, something happened to Windows. So let's find out. Right, we're back. I thought somehow I screwed up the Windows bootloader, but no, everything works fine. What a lovely thing to be greeted with. So, all I'm going to do now, I'm going to restart Windows. I'm going to boot into Debian. So I'm not even going to log in. Let's restart. If I remember right, the YUMI flash drive that I had in there did have a Windows 10 installer on it. I think it was for LTSC. Let's try booting Windows 10. Okay, we got Windows 10. So never mind, I didn't break it. Ah, yeah. So, let's install some games. Test them.